It was the cold hour just before sunrise when Rachel Miller made her decision. The sky above Lexington, Kentucky, was the color of bruised lilac, and every empty street seemed to echo her failure. Her old sedan groaned as she loaded her battered sketchbooks and half-finished canvases into the trunk, hands trembling, breath puffing white in the March chill. She'd spent the last of her savings renting the gallery space, hoping for her big break. But the show had ended with nothing but silence and pitying glances. The little town she once thought would cradle her dreams now felt like a prison. She tightened her scarf, eyes burning, and pulled away from the curb, not sure where she was headed, just away. As she drove out past the edge of town, morning mist curled over the hills like smoke, swallowing the empty fields. She planned to keep going, to forget the whole mess. But then, through the fog, a ragged shape caught her eye. A gaunt brown stallion, ribs sharp under a dull coat, tied to a falling-down fence by the roadside pasture. Rachel slowed, heart thudding. She almost kept driving. Instead, she pulled over, cut the engine, and stepped out into the freezing grass. The horse shivered, legs trembling, eyes wide and wild, nostrils flaring with each breath. He looked half-starved, a tangled mess of burrs in his mane, the halter biting into the raw skin behind his ears. For a long moment, neither moved. Then a battered pickup rattled up, headlights slashing through the gloom. A farmer leaned out the window, face lined and grim. "You looking at that horse?" he called. Rachel nodded, hugging herself. "That animal's been abandoned all week," the man said. "Nobody wants him. Animal control's on their way, probably to put him down. He's not safe." Rachel's stomach twisted. She glanced back at the horse, who took a hesitant step, ears flicking. Ignoring the warning, she reached into her pocket and found a half-eaten apple from last night's lonely dinner. She held it out, voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, buddy, it's okay." The stallion snorted, eyes rolling. Rachel edged closer, speaking softly, every muscle tight. For a long minute he hesitated. Then, as if exhausted by his own fear, he stretched out his neck and took the apple from her palm, teeth scraping her skin. Rachel let out a shaky breath. She moved slowly, careful not to spook him, and managed to slip the halter over his head. Up close she saw the desperation in his eyes, pleading, but wary, as if he'd learned not to trust hope. She could feel his ribs beneath her hands, and she thought, someone just gave up on you, and maybe on me too. As she started to untie the lead rope, a shout rang out across the pasture. A gruff neighbor, pajamas tucked into boots, waving a mug of coffee. "Hey, that's the horse that broke a man's arm last month. He's dangerous. You want to lose a hand, lady?" Rachel hesitated, her heart pounding. The stallion tensed, as if expecting another blow. The farmer from the truck just shook his head, rolling up the window. "You'll regret it," he called, driving off. Rachel looked at the horse, at the wreck of her own life packed into the back seat, and felt the strangest thing, an unexpected surge of determination. Maybe she was reckless, maybe desperate, but she could not walk away. The sky was growing lighter, a faint gold bleeding into the horizon. Animal control would be here soon. The horse looked at her with wild, haunted eyes, and Rachel saw in them everything she feared in herself: abandonment, hunger, the ache to belong. She gently tugged the lead rope. "Come on, Rusty," she said, naming him in a moment, as if that might grant him a future. He stumbled after her, hooves clattering on the frost-bitten ground. As they reached her car, he balked, nearly pulling free. She soothed him, fingers trembling, and managed to coax him into a shaky walk. The neighbor shouted again, voice sharp with warning, but Rachel ignored him, her mind a blur of adrenaline and dread. A siren wailed far off. Maybe for them, maybe not. She loaded Rusty into the back lot behind the apartments, heart hammering, every sense alive with fear and hope. She didn't know it yet, but this choice, the crazy, irreversible kindness of saving a broken horse, was about to turn her whole life upside down, setting her on a path she could never have imagined. As the first rays of sun broke over the Kentucky hills, Rachel pressed her forehead to Rusty's neck and whispered, "You're safe now." But deep down, she wondered who she was really trying to rescue, and whether either of them could ever find their way home. Rachel barely slept that first night. She kept jolting awake at every sound: the clang of a trash can in the alley, the bark of a dog down the street, the distant wail of a siren. Out in the back lot, behind her rundown apartment building, Rusty paced the muddy patch of ground she'd hurriedly fenced in with plywood scraps, garden stakes, and some old lattice she'd found in the dumpster. It was makeshift, ugly, and almost certainly not legal, but it was all she could do with what she had. The horse looked impossibly large and wild in the tiny space, breath pluming in the cold air, hooves churning up the last stubs of grass. Rachel sat huddled by her kitchen window, knees drawn up to her chest, watching him through the cracked glass. Her heart hammered every time Rusty kicked at the boards or let out a piercing whinny that echoed off the brick walls, making her neighbors' windows light up one by one. By dawn, a crowd had already gathered in the alley. A pair of teenage boys with skateboards pointed and laughed as Rusty snorted and spun at their jeers. Mrs. Danvers, who lived in 2B and took great pride in knowing everyone's business, was already on the phone, voice shrill. "Yes, I said there's a horse in the parking lot. A real horse. And it's going crazy." Rachel bit her lip, pulling on boots and a battered jacket. When she stepped outside, she was met with a chorus of complaints. "You can't keep that thing here. My kids walk through this lot every morning. It's gonna bite someone." Her landlord, Mr. Jenkins, stormed over in slippers, waving a rolled-up leash. "Rachel, you got 24 hours to get rid of that animal or you're both out, understand?" He didn't wait for an answer. Rusty, sensing the tension, bucked against the fence, nearly toppling the panels. Rachel rushed to calm him, heart pounding. She pressed her hand to his neck, speaking softly, but he flinched from her touch, whites of his eyes showing. "Easy, boy. I'm not giving up on you, okay? Not yet." The horse pawed at the dirt, still trembling, as if the ground itself might open up and swallow him. She glanced around, face burning under the neighbors' stares, then slipped a halter over Rusty's head and led him away, just to escape their judgment. She knew the city park on Limestone Avenue had an old paddock sometimes used for riding lessons. She figured if she walked Rusty there, he might calm down, or at least get out some of his nervous energy. The streets were busy by then, and every honk or passing motorcycle sent Rusty bolting sideways, yanking the lead rope so hard Rachel's shoulders ached. Once he reared up, hooves flailing at the air, and for a terrifying moment she thought she'd lose him right there in traffic. A mother dragging her son past shot Rachel a glare. That horse shouldn't be anywhere near kids. At the park, the paddock was empty except for a couple of seasoned horse owners exercising their own animals. Rachel kept Rusty at the far end, but he was restless, prancing and sidestepping at every rustle of wind. She tried to walk him in circles, but a sudden shout from the ball field sent him into a panic. He jerked hard, nearly tearing the rope from her hands, and kicked at the fence, spooking a pony and earning an earful from its furious owner. "Get that maniac out of here," the woman barked. "You're going to get someone hurt." Rachel's cheeks burned. She managed to wrestle Rusty back under control, her whole body shaking from the effort. She led him home with her head down, the words untrainable, dangerous, and idiot ringing in her ears. That night, After hours spent scouring horse forums and rescue pages for advice, Rachel collapsed onto her sagging couch, phone buzzing with messages from Olivia, her best friend, and lately, her only friend. "Are you serious? A horse? In your backyard?" Rachel smiled wearily and texted back, "Just for tonight. He has nowhere else to go." She wished she believed it. Later, while cleaning out the fridge for something to feed Rusty, half a bag of carrots, wilted lettuce, a stale roll, she heard pounding on her door. It was Mr. Jenkins again, flanked by Mrs. Danvers and two other tenants. "We're not having this!" Mrs. Danvers screeched. "My little Pomeranian won't stop barking! My grandson's allergic!" Mr. Jenkins shoved a printed notice into Rachel's hand. "Final warning. 24 hours, no animals, or you're out." He turned on his heel, and the others trailed after, muttering. Rachel slumped against the door, feeling panic rise up. She knew she couldn't hide Rusty here forever. But where would he go? The thought of him in some animal control trailer, frightened and alone, made her stomach churn. She tried to comfort herself. Maybe she'd find a sanctuary or a rescue group willing to help. But every phone call ended in the same answer. "We're full. We can't take on another. Especially not a stallion. Especially not one with a reputation." Later that evening, exhausted, she scrolled through social media and saw a post in a local Lexington group. "Aggressive stallion loose in Lexington. Animal control searching. Do not approach. Dangerous, unpredictable." The photo was Rusty, wild-eyed and gaunt, snapped that morning in the fog, where Rachel's breath caught. She realized then just how narrow her window was. If animal control found Rusty, it was over. There'd be no second chance for him or for her. She stood in her silent kitchen, hands shaking, staring at her battered keys and the hastily assembled corral outside. It felt like the world was closing in. She faced a gut-wrenching choice. Turn Rusty in, surrendering him to certain death. Or risk everything, her home, her safety, her future, to try to save him one more day. Outside in the dark, Rusty let out a lonely, echoing whinny, Rachel's heart squeezed tight. She knew, somehow, that whatever she chose, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Rachel found herself waking up each morning before dawn, pulled by some invisible tether to the back lot. The corral she'd built for Rusty was hardly worthy of the name. It wobbled in every breeze, patched together with broken pallets and old fencing scavenged from alleyways. But it was all she could offer. Each day, before the city rumbled awake, she would sit on a battered lawn chair beside the pen, bundled in her grandfather's faded army coat, sketchbook balanced on her knees. She drew Rusty endlessly, trying to understand him line by line, curve by trembling curve. At first, he kept his distance, pacing the perimeter with restless, uneven steps. Any sudden movement, Rachel shifting in her seat, a dog barking on the other side of the lot, a siren echoing down the street, would make him jerk his head up, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. She watched the way he stood, one ear always angled toward her, as if he was listening for danger. The deep scars crisscrossing his flanks caught the morning light, and Rachel felt her heart twist. She knew that kind of wariness. She'd worn it herself, moving from one cold apartment to another, never quite trusting the ground beneath her feet. On the third morning, she reached out to offer a carrot. Rusty's body tensed so hard she thought he might bolt straight through the fence, but something in her voice, soft, careful, coaxing, made him pause. He took the carrot with a quick, almost apologetic nip, then retreated to the farthest corner, chewing with his head low. Progress came in tiny increments. Over the next week, Rachel kept her routines steady. She brought water at the same time every day, left the gate open just a little longer, let him see her sketching from different angles. Each evening, she'd prop her phone up and call Olivia, sometimes on video so her friend could see Rusty. "He looks rough, Rach," Olivia would say, concern thick in her voice. "You sure this is worth it?" Rachel tried to sound confident, but the truth was, she felt just as lost as Rusty did. "He's not the only one who needs a second chance," she confessed, tracing the line of Rusty's jaw in her sketchbook. "I keep thinking if I can help him, maybe I can help myself." Olivia's face softened. "I get it, but don't lose yourself in this, okay? You already gave up so much for your art, for this town. Don't let one horse break you." But Rachel shook her head. "He's not breaking me, Liv. I don't know, reminding me that it's possible to heal, even after you've been abandoned." Some days were easier than others. Rusty began to watch her from the corner of his eye, following her movements with quiet curiosity. When she sang softly, old country songs her mother used to hum in the kitchen, his ears flicked toward her, and once, after a long silence, he let out a deep, rumbling sigh. It was the closest thing to trust Rachel had seen in years, but the world outside their little sanctuary felt ready to crash in at any moment. Rachel's landlord pounded on her door twice that week, reminding her that the clock was ticking. Flyers about the dangerous stallion kept appearing on neighborhood bulletin boards. At the grocery store, she heard people talking about the crazy artist with the wild horse. Shame crept into her bones, but she pressed on, clinging to her routines and the fragile bond forming in the muddy lot. Then the storm hit. It rolled in fast, the sky boiling green and black, thunder rattling the apartment windows. Rachel was curled on the couch, sketching by lamplight, when she heard the first panicked whinny. She dropped her pencil and ran for the back door, heart pounding, rain already sheeting down. Rusty was frantic, rearing and kicking at the fence, eyes rolling white with terror as lightning lit up the sky. Rachel hesitated, fear prickling her skin. One wrong move and he could crush her without even meaning to. But something inside her, some deep reservoir of courage, pushed her forward. She slid into the pen, arms raised, voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's okay, Rusty. I'm here. You're not alone." He circled, nostrils flaring, hooves slicing the muddy ground. Rachel moved slowly, hands out, singing the old lullaby again. The storm raged overhead, but inside the pen, time seemed to slow. Rusty stopped, trembling, his whole body shuddering with every rumble of thunder. Rachel reached out, gently touching his neck. He flinched, but didn't bolt. She stroked his sweat-soaked coat, whispering soft nonsense, feeling his heartbeat hammer against her palm. After endless minutes, he dropped his head and pressed it against her shoulder, breath hot and damp in the crook of her arm. They stood like that until the worst of the storm had passed, rain washing over them, the air crackling with electricity and relief. Rachel's knees shook, and tears ran down her cheeks. Tears for all the things she'd lost, for the fear she still carried, and for the strange, fierce hope blooming in her chest. Later, wrapped in a blanket, she watched Rusty finally relax, his breathing slowing as he drifted into exhausted sleep. In that moment, Rachel realized something had changed, not just for the horse, but for her as well. She had faced her fear and found, in the heart of chaos, a fragile new trust. She didn't know what would come next. She only knew she wasn't alone anymore. And neither was Rusty. For the first time in a long while, that was enough. The rain from the storm lingered for days, leaving Lexington draped in a damp gray that seemed to seep into every corner of Rachel's little world. She spent those mornings in muddy boots, checking Rusty's pen for loose boards, anxiety knotting tighter in her chest with every fresh puddle. The horse was calmer now, though still haunted. He would come to the fence when Rachel approached, his eyes less wild, his breath warmer on her hand. Yet some part of him flinched at quick movements or unexpected sounds, as if he still carried the echoes of violence inside his bones. One sleepless night, after yet another warning from her landlord, Rachel sat in the glow of her laptop, searching for answers. She joined an online horse rescue forum and described Rusty's scars, his unpredictable moods, the way his back right leg dragged ever so slightly. Most replies urged her to see a vet. Some even suggested that putting him down might be the only humane choice. The words stung, making Rachel's chest tighten, but she forced herself to keep reading. Among the posts, one name kept coming up: Dr. Harris, a well-respected equine vet known for helping horses others had given up on. Summoning her courage, Rachel called his clinic, voice shaking. "He's skittish, but he's not mean," she insisted, her words tumbling over each other. "He just needs someone to try." The next afternoon, Rachel drove Rusty to Dr. Harris's rural clinic. The ride was a nightmare. Rusty kicked and pawed in the borrowed trailer, sweat darkening his sides by the time they arrived. The waiting room smelled of hay and antiseptic. Rachel could feel the eyes of other clients, wealthy owners with polished boots and glossy show horses, sliding over her muddy jeans and tired face. When Dr. Harris came out, he was older than she expected, hair silver at the temples, his gaze gentle but sharp as he listened to Rachel's halting story. "Let's take a look at your boy," he said, leading her into the exam barn. The exam was tense from the start. Rusty's ears flattened, his body tensed as Dr. Harris approached. Rachel stood at his head, stroking his muzzle, murmuring reassurance. "He's had it rough, Doc," she whispered. The vet worked slowly, running practiced hands over Rusty's coat, examining the faded welts and scars, some old, some disturbingly fresh. When he reached Rusty's right hind leg, he frowned. "There's an old injury here. Looks like it was never treated properly." He pressed gently, and Rusty flinched. "See this?" Dr. Harris showed Rachel a faint indentation near the hock. "He was likely raced hard, then tossed aside when he couldn't win. It happens more than you'd think, especially in barns that cut corners." Rachel's throat went dry. She looked at Rusty, suddenly seeing him not as a wild animal, but as someone wounded, betrayed by humans he'd been forced to trust. "He's not dangerous," she insisted. "Just scared." Dr. Harris gave her a long look. "I believe you. But Kentucky law doesn't see it that way. If animal control gets a report, and they find a horse with a record of aggression, they're required to act. Owners can be fined, or worse, the horse can be seized." The words crashed over Rachel like cold water. She felt the world shift beneath her feet, fear prickling up her spine. "Is there anything I can do?" Dr. Harris considered, then nodded. "There's hope, but it'll take time and patience. Physical therapy for the leg, a quiet environment, trust building. But you have to keep him out of trouble. If someone complains, or he gets loose again, there won't be a second chance." He scribbled a list of exercises, gave her advice on calming supplements and proper feeding, and pressed a firm hand on her shoulder before she left. "Don't give up on him, Miss Miller. Horses like him, they can come back. But you have to fight for it." The drive home was silent. Rusty shifted in the trailer, uneasy but less frantic than before. Rachel felt the weight of the vet's words settle on her chest, heavy as stone. She spent that night sitting on the steps outside Rusty's pen, watching fireflies blink over the dark grass, listening to his slow, steady breathing. She thought about everything she'd learned, about abuse, betrayal, the way the world closed ranks against anything broken or difficult. She wondered what it would mean to risk everything for a horse no one else wanted, to challenge the law and the judgment of her neighbors for the sake of trust that was still fragile as spun glass. As dawn crept over Lexington, painting the sky a pale, uncertain blue, Rachel made her decision. She would risk it, not just for Rusty, but for herself, for all the years she'd spent apologizing for being too much, too passionate, too stubborn. If she had to give up her apartment, her safety, even her art, so be it. She owed Rusty and herself at least that much. But deep down, fear remained. She knew she was running out of time, that the next knock on her door could mean the end for Rusty, and everything she was fighting to protect. Still, as the first rays of sunlight touched the battered fence, Rachel leaned against the wood, her hand on Rusty's mane, and whispered, "We're not done yet, not by a long shot." Neither of them could know how quickly the next challenge would arrive, or how high the stakes would climb. But as the city woke around them, Rachel's resolve hardened. She would fight for Rusty, no matter the cost. Even if it meant putting herself in the line of fire. Even if it meant standing alone. Because sometimes you had to risk everything to set the truth free. Rachel didn't have much left to sell, but she gathered what she could. Her little apartment, cluttered with unfinished canvases and stacks of old sketchbooks, was a graveyard of lost dreams and failed exhibitions. Still, she spent an afternoon sorting through her art, choosing paintings that hurt to part with. Her mother's portrait, a sunlit Kentucky barn, her last hopeful landscape. She posted them online, desperate for quick cash, her hands trembling as the bids trickled in. Every dollar meant more hay, more plywood, another day for Rusty. It felt like trying to hold back a tidal wave with her bare hands. The neighbors were relentless. Mrs. Danvers led a delegation to the landlord, who left furious voicemails every night, demanding that Rachel deal with that animal or face eviction. On Tuesday morning, Rachel woke to the sound of a city vehicle idling in the alley. She peered out the window and saw two animal control officers in navy uniforms, clipboards in hand. They rapped on her door, faces grim but not unkind. "We've had several reports, ma'am, about a dangerous horse. City ordinance says you can't keep livestock here, especially one with a history." Rachel pleaded, trying to explain how Rusty had changed, how he just needed a little more time, a little more kindness. But they shook their heads, unmoved. "We're giving you 72 hours. After that, if the horse is still here, we'll have to take him." The words landed like a physical blow. Rachel nodded, numb, barely hearing as they handed her a formal notice and warned, "If he gets loose again, we won't have a choice." When they left, Rachel collapsed on the front steps, head in her hands. Sata, sensing her distress, nudged her shoulder. She wrapped her arms around his neck, tears hot and silent on her cheeks. "I'm sorry, boy. I don't know what to do." She sat there until the sun sank behind the rooftops, her mind spinning with fear and guilt. She called Olivia, voice raw. "They're going to take him, Liv. I can't let that happen." Olivia tried to comfort her, but her words were practical, almost cold. "Rach, you did your best. Maybe it's time to let go. You're risking everything, for a horse you barely know." Rachel flinched. "I do know him. He's not just some project, Liv. He trusts me. For the first time, someone trusts me, and I can't betray that." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "I want to help, but you can't do this alone. Find someone who knows how to fight these battles. There have to be rescue groups, sanctuaries, something." That night, unable to sleep, Rachel scoured the internet for answers. She found a small, passionate network of horse rescuers. Women in battered trucks, old cowboys with stories and scars, a retired vet with a soft spot for lost causes. One, a woman named Marlene, offered hope. There's a sanctuary outside Lexington. They've taken tough horses before, but it's expensive. Land, feed, legal paperwork. If you can raise the money, I'll vouch for you. Rachel's pulse hammered. She set up a fundraising page telling Rusty's story with trembling honesty. His scars, his fear, the way he'd learned to trust again. She posted photos of his gentle eyes, his battered body. Donations trickled in. $10 from a retired teacher, $20 from a teenage girl who loved horses, $50 from a stranger who wrote, "For every animal nobody wanted." Still, it wasn't enough. She called the sanctuary, heart in her throat, and begged them to hold a spot for Rusty. "I'll get the money, I promise. Just give us a few days." The director hesitated, then relented. "You've got 1 week, but after that, we have to move on." Rachel knew she had to move fast. She borrowed money from Olivia, swallowing her pride. She sold her last good camera, her grandmother's silver bracelet. The apartment grew emptier by the hour. Each time Rachel passed the half-packed boxes, she felt the cost, but she pressed on. Rusty's life was worth more than any possession she'd ever owned. In the final days, the tension mounted. Rain leaked through the window. Rusty grew restless, kicking at the fence, eyes darting every time a car passed. Rachel spent sleepless nights watching the alley, terrified that someone would call animal control early. She worked in the mud, building a makeshift shelter on the leased plot outside Lexington, hands blistered, nails broken, hair plastered to her forehead. Olivia arrived with coffee and sandwiches, lending her strength, hauling fence posts, comforting Rachel when her resolve faltered. "You're stubborn as hell," Olivia muttered, "but you're not alone. Not anymore." Rachel managed a shaky laugh, gratitude blooming in her chest. By the 5th day, the new corral was taking shape. A patch of rough pasture, ringed by fresh wire and battered boards. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. The sanctuary director came by to inspect it, brows raised in surprise. "Not bad for a city girl," she teased, "but you'll need to pass the final inspection. If it's not up to code, animal control won't let you keep him." Rachel's heart hammered in her chest, but she nodded. She wasn't giving up. With one last day to spare, Rachel arranged for Rusty's transport, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. She stood by the fence, watching him graze beneath the dawn sky, the air thick with hope and dread. "Almost there, boy," she whispered. "Just a little longer." She pressed her forehead to his mane, breathing in the warm, earthy scent. Rusty nuzzled her sleeve, soft and trusting. As the sun rose, Rachel vowed to herself that, no matter what the final inspection brought, she would never walk away. She'd come this far, and she was ready to risk everything for Rusty's chance at a new life. The land Rachel leased wasn't much, but it felt like the beginning of a dream. A stretch of rough grass and wildflowers bordered by woods, sun-baked during the day and whispering with crickets at night. The fencing circled like a promise, still raw and unfinished in spots, some boards crooked and others patched together with baling twine. Each morning Rachel arrived early, her truck bed piled high with lumber, tools, and supplies borrowed from Marlene and the rescue crew. Rusty, still skittish but curious, paced the new pasture, his eyes scanning every flutter of birds or rustle in the brush. Sometimes he'd pause, nostrils wide, as if tasting freedom for the first time and not yet believing it was real. Rachel worked herself ragged. There were permits to finalize, forms to sign, and a dozen inspections looming overhead. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but she pushed herself harder each day, hammering fence posts in the rain, scrubbing the old water troughs until they gleamed, laying out straw in the shelter she'd built with Olivia's help. Evenings brought exhaustion so deep she would fall asleep still wearing her boots, only to be jolted awake by the smallest noise outside, panic flaring that something had gone wrong. The weather turned wild halfway through the week. Thunderheads rolled in from the west, bruising the sky a deep purple, and a sudden summer storm tore across the property. Rachel was inside the tiny shelter painting a new nameplate for Rusty's stall when she heard a crash that set her heart pounding. She ran out into the sheeting rain and found the northwest fence sagging, half the posts ripped from the ground. Mud sucked at her boots as she sprinted across the field, fear blurring her thoughts. Rusty was nowhere in sight. "No, no, not now," she gasped, scanning the tree line. Then, from the edge of the woods, she heard it. The sound of hooves beating the ground, sharp and panicked. Rusty appeared, soaked to the skin, eyes rolling white with terror. Rachel called his name, voice nearly lost in the roar of rain. He hesitated, ears flicking, then bolted in the opposite direction, splashing through a low ditch. Rachel gave chase, arms waving, ignoring the sting of brambles and rain pelting her face. She kept calling, her voice steady, "Rusty, come on, buddy, over here," even as her legs burned and her chest tightened with dread. For a breathless minute it seemed hopeless, but then Rusty turned, trembling and confused, nostrils flaring as he caught the sound of her voice. He stopped just shy of the road, hooves sliding in the mud, and stood there uncertain. Rachel slowed her approach, lowering her hands, heart hammering so loudly she thought he must hear it. "It's okay. I'm here," she murmured, edging closer. Step by step, Rusty let her draw near until she could grab the lead rope she always carried in her pocket. She pressed her forehead to his neck, her own tears lost in the rain. "You scared me, but you came back." For a moment, under the wild sky, Rachel felt something shift, a fragile thread of trust growing stronger, binding them both to this battered patch of earth. Back at the shelter, Rachel collapsed to her knees, breath ragged, mud streaked up her arms. Rusty stood over her, still shaking, but his gaze was steady. She offered him a handful of grain and watched, relief washing over her as he ate from her palm. The storm eased. Rachel fixed the fence with the last of her strength, working by flashlight as darkness pressed in. When she finally climbed into her truck, every muscle in her body ached, but her spirit burned with stubborn hope. The next days were no easier. Rusty, spooked by the escape, grew listless and wary, refusing to eat for hours at a time. Rachel's fear came roaring back. She remembered Dr. Harris's warning about old wounds, about horses who gave up. She spent hours in the pasture talking softly, reading aloud from her sketchbook, sometimes just sitting in silence beside him. She tried every trick she knew, coaxing him with apples, grooming his tangled mane, showing him the boundaries of the new corral over and over until, slowly, his appetite returned and his eyes regained their wary spark. But as Rachel's energy flagged, Olivia stepped up. Without telling Rachel, she began sharing photos and videos of Rachel and Rusty online. A muddy, rain-soaked woman hugging a battered horse, both looking stubborn and exhausted. The posts spread quickly, catching the attention of local animal lovers, then reaching rescue forums across the state. Messages poured in, offers of supplies, encouragement, small donations. People sent hay bales, fencing materials, gift cards for feed stores. One old rancher showed up in a battered Ford with an armload of cedar posts. "Heard you needed a hand," he said, with a crooked grin. Rachel watched, amazed, as strangers rolled up their sleeves to help. Kids from a nearby riding club painted the new fence, adding wildflowers and bright blue horseshoes. Volunteers cleared debris, built a stronger shelter, and repaired the paddock. Marlene organized a fence-raising picnic, complete with lemonade and sandwiches, everyone working late into the golden evening. For the first time since this ordeal began, Rachel felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Not all at once, but enough to breathe. Rusty, too, seemed to sense the change. He watched the bustle with cautious interest, letting children stroke his neck and even dozing in the sun, while music and laughter drifted through the field. Still, the final challenge loomed. The last inspection. The county official would arrive soon, clipboard in hand, ready to decide Rusty's fate. Rachel paced the fence the night before, nerves raw, counting boards, checking latches, running through every detail a dozen times. Rusty followed her, quiet and steady, never straying far from her side. She whispered into his mane, "We've come too far to let go now. Whatever happens, I won't give up on you." As dawn broke, painting the pasture gold, Rachel stood with Rusty at the gate, waiting for the inspector's car. Everything hung in the balance. Their future, their hard-won peace, the promise that no one would be left behind. She squeezed Rusty's lead rope, heart pounding with hope and dread, and promised herself, no matter what, we're not alone anymore. Not ever again. Inspection day dawned impossibly bright and clear, the kind of Kentucky morning that makes the air taste new. Rachel barely slept, jolted awake by nerves and the relentless to-do list rattling through her mind. She was in the pasture at sunrise, hands numb from worry and dew, double-checking every gate latch and water trough, tightening fence wires, sweeping out the small shelter one last time. The wildflowers along the fence, planted by the riding club kids, their petals every shade of blue and yellow, looked radiant in the soft light, nodding in the breeze. Rusty, for his part, watched her every move, ears flicking forward, calm and steady, no longer the wild creature she'd first found on the side of the road. There was a new peace in his eyes, a hard-won trust that made Rachel's heart ache with pride and love. By mid-morning, the volunteers who'd become her lifeline arrived to help, Olivia first among them, bearing coffee and a tight, reassuring hug. "We're ready," Olivia whispered, her voice fierce with belief. The small crew worked quietly, adjusting the corral, laying out fresh hay, lining the water buckets. Marlene arrived with the sanctuary director, both bringing calm, steady presence. Word had gotten out. Neighbors who once complained now leaned over the fence with encouraging smiles, a few even pitching in to paint the new gate a cheerful sky blue. When the inspector's car finally pulled up, Rachel felt her stomach knot. The woman who stepped out looked efficient, but not unkind, dressed in jeans and boots, clipboard tucked under one arm. She greeted everyone with a brief nod, then began her circuit of the property. Rachel trailed her at a respectful distance, answering questions, pointing out improvements. The inspector checked the shelter, solid, weatherproof, bedded with fresh straw, then ran her hand along the new fencing, eyed the water supply, checked for shade and safe footing. Every moment stretched on a thread, each note the inspector jotted feeling like a verdict. As the inspection wound down, the inspector paused at the pasture's edge and observed Rusty. The stallion stood in the sun, head high, tail lifted, his coat glossy from weeks of care. Without warning, he broke into a gallop, streaking across the grass, mane flying, a soundless exclamation of joy. He looped around the fence, bucking and tossing his head, then slowed and trotted up to where Rachel stood, pressing his nose to her palm. The inspector's lips quirked into a small, surprised smile. "He's come a long way," she remarked. Rachel felt tears sting her eyes, but she managed to nod. "We both have." For a moment, the inspector simply watched the scene. The battered artist and the once broken horse, surrounded by wildflowers and hope. Then she signed her forms and handed Rachel the license. "Congratulations. You're officially cleared to operate as a legal sanctuary. Rusty can stay." Relief hit Rachel so hard her knees nearly buckled. Olivia caught her in a hug, both of them laughing and crying as the volunteers erupted into cheers. The news spread quickly. Marlene posted a photo online, Rachel holding the permit in one hand and Rusty's halter in the other, both looking dazed and victorious. The comments flooded in. "We believed in you. Thank you for giving him a chance. There's hope for all of us." Donations and supplies arrived in a steady trickle. Local businesses offered support. The small, makeshift sanctuary had become a symbol, proof that perseverance and community could make miracles out of nothing. As the day wore on, the pasture became a scene of quiet celebration. Neighbors and new friends brought lemonade and cookies. Kids braided wildflowers into Rusty's mane, and a retired carpenter helped build a sturdy bench beneath the shade tree. Reporters from the local paper and a regional news station arrived, asking Rachel to tell her story. At first, her voice trembled with nerves, but Olivia squeezed her hand, and Rachel found her words. He was abandoned. Everyone said he was dangerous, untrainable, but he just needed someone not to give up on him. Rusty isn't the only one who needed a second chance. The story spread further than Rachel could have imagined. She received letters from people all over Kentucky, some who'd rescued animals themselves, some who just needed to believe in new beginnings. One woman, a recent widow, wrote, "Watching Rusty run free gave me hope again. Thank you for reminding me the broken can heal." The sanctuary quickly found its calling. Animal control began referring difficult cases to Rachel, trusting her hard-won experience and gentle determination. Other horses arrived. A battered old carriage mare named Lady, a retired police horse called Bruno, a timid foal orphaned in a barn fire. Each one bore its own scars, its own story of survival. Rusty became the heart of the new herd. He greeted newcomers with a careful gentleness, guiding them with patience learned from his own pain. He stood watch over the foal, allowed children to stroke his nose, and still, every evening, galloped along the fence with the setting sun blazing behind him. Rachel, for her part, found a new sense of purpose, something she'd never tasted during her lonely years as a struggling artist. She organized workshops for local kids, teaching them to care for animals, to trust their hands and their hearts. The laughter and joy that filled the sanctuary became a kind of music, sweet and redemptive. Late that night, as the celebration faded and the pasture glowed gold in the last light, Rachel stood by the fence, one hand on Rusty's neck. She watched him graze, peaceful and whole, in a way she hadn't thought possible months before. She realized she'd created not just a home for a broken horse, but a sanctuary for herself, a place where wounds could become wisdom, and where hope was born out of the hardest battles. The official permit hung in the shelter, a testament to everything they had overcome together. But as she turned toward the barn, the scent of smoke on the evening air caught her attention. Rachel's heart stuttered. In the deepening dusk, a thin plume rose from behind the hayshed. The volunteers, busy packing up, didn't notice at first. Rachel shouted, her voice slicing through the calm, "Smoke, over here!" And in an instant, the peace of the day transformed into a new crisis. The barn was in danger. Rachel raced across the field, the sounds of running feet and Rusty's urgent neigh behind her. the sanctuary's future suddenly teetering on the edge once more. In the days and weeks after the fire, a quiet but profound transformation swept through the sanctuary. The barn's blackened boards were replaced, volunteers arriving with hammers, paint, and boundless energy, their laughter and shouts mixing with the sound of horses snorting in the morning mist. The near tragedy had knit the community together, forging bonds that would have taken years under any other circumstances. For Rachel, every sunrise felt like a gift she hadn't expected to receive. She would stand at the fence with a mug of coffee, watching the new herd graze, the survivors, the misfits, and the once lost souls, all finding their place in the green, forgiving Kentucky pasture. Rusty was no longer the solitary, haunted animal she'd first rescued. He had become the heart of something much bigger, a living symbol of survival, patience, and healing. When Lady, the old carriage mare, arrived, she came with scars across her flanks and a permanent limp. Yet Rusty welcomed her with gentle nuzzles, guiding her to the best patches of clover. Bruno, the retired police horse, spooked easily at sudden noises, but Rusty was always there, a calm and steady presence. And then there was the foal, timid and orphaned, clinging to Lady's side until slowly she learned to trust. Rusty took on the role of protector and teacher, nosing the foal toward fresh water, standing watch on stormy nights, and offering a gentle head bump when she trembled. Rachel's world, once so small and filled with loss, had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. Children and families started to visit the sanctuary, some from town, others from far-off counties, after hearing about Rusty and the fire on local news. The barn became a place of learning, laughter, and recovery. Rachel hosted weekend workshops, teaching children about horses, compassion, and the responsibility that comes with caring for another living being. She watched shy, anxious kids blossom as they learned to brush Rusty's coat, their giggles floating over the field as he snuffled their pockets for carrots. Volunteers came from all walks of life: a shy teenager who'd been bullied at school, a woman healing from divorce, a retired farrier who'd lost his own farm in the recession. Each found a new rhythm at the sanctuary. There was a kind of quiet magic in mucking stalls together at sunrise, in sitting side by side at the paddock gate, sharing stories as dusk fell and the fireflies blinked to life. Even Rachel's relationship with Olivia grew deeper, the two of them sharing the work and the weight of each new day, sometimes laughing until they cried over coffee in the tack room. Rusty, once called dangerous and untrainable, became the herd's gentle leader, the favorite of visiting children, and the subject of paintings and sketches that Rachel hung in the newly rebuilt barn. Families who visited left with more than memories. They left with hope, with a renewed sense that healing was possible, no matter how long the odds or how many scars you carried. Rachel's online updates about the sanctuary drew the attention of people all across the state. Donations increased: bags of feed, new tack, even a mobile vet clinic that offered free checkups for rescues. Messages poured in from people who'd lost faith and now found comfort in Rusty's story. A teenager who wrote, "Your horse gave me courage to get help." A mother who shared that the sanctuary was the first place her autistic son had ever spoken aloud outside their home. But with all the beauty and growth came new challenges. The sanctuary's reputation meant there was always another animal in need, another urgent phone call, another plea for help. Rachel learned to balance joy with sorrow, victories with setbacks. The horses needed constant care, and the barn required repairs after every heavy rain. There were days when Rachel worried the burden was too great, that she'd stretched herself and her small team too thin. Sometimes at night, she sat alone in the pasture, the darkness pressing close, and wondered if she could keep up with the weight of so many depending on her. Then, one evening, as dusk fell purple and gold across the fields, Rachel noticed a strange glow flickering at the edge of the barn. Her heart clenched, memories of the fire surging back. She dropped her feed bucket and ran, shouting for Olivia and Marlene. But this time, as she rounded the barn, she didn't find flames. Only a group of children from the day's class, carefully lighting mason jar lanterns to hang along the paddock fence. "For Rusty and the others," one little girl said, eyes wide with pride, "so they'll never be alone in the dark." Rachel's chest ached as she hugged them all, the relief nearly knocking her breath away. She looked up at the lanterns glowing soft and warm against the deepening sky. Each one a promise. Each one a symbol of the hope they'd all kindled together. Rusty watched from the pasture, his silhouette strong and sure in the golden light. And for the first time, Rachel allowed herself to truly believe they were safe. They had found not just sanctuary, but home. And yet, as the lanterns swayed in the night breeze and laughter rang out across the fields, Rachel knew the sanctuary would always be one spark away from disaster, one storm away from chaos. But she also knew, deep in her bones, that together, with courage, faith, and the unbreakable bond of community, they could face whatever darkness came. In Rusty's journey, and in her own, she had learned the greatest lesson of all. Hope survives, even through the fire, as long as there is someone willing to light a lantern against the night. The sun barely crested the horizon when Rachel made her way out to the pasture. The fields still streaked with mist, and the barn smelling faintly of smoke and damp straw. The night had been long, every hour punctuated by worry. She kept replaying the fire in her mind, the choking fear, the image of Rusty's wide, panicked eyes, the shouts of her friends and neighbors as they fought to save what they'd all built together. She was exhausted, but alive with a gratitude so sharp it hurt. The barn was singed and scarred, but the structure held. No animals had been lost. The pasture, though dotted with blackened hay and muddy tracks, felt like hallowed ground, a place marked by survival. As she approached the paddock, Rusty lifted his head from where he grazed with Lady, Bruno, and the foal. He watched her, steady and calm, as if anchoring her with his gaze. Rachel ducked under the fence, moving slow, every muscle sore. She found herself talking to Rusty, maybe for his sake, maybe for her own. "You know, I didn't think I could do any of this," she murmured, running her hand along his mane, the early light glinting off his copper coat. "I spent so long thinking everything I touched would break. I was always running from something, failure, loneliness, the next disappointment. But you never gave up, even when you were abandoned. You showed me how to stay." She sat beside him as the dawn brightened, the herd shifting quietly around her. The sanctuary was slowly coming back to life. Olivia arrived with breakfast and coffee. The volunteers trickled in to help clean up the aftermath, and even some of the neighbors who once complained about Rusty brought muffins and fresh towels. It felt, for the first time, like a true community, one bound by more than just geography, but by the memory of standing together in the face of disaster. Later that morning, Rachel was invited to speak at a local community event, organized in gratitude for everyone who'd rushed to help. She stood before a small crowd, her voice trembling at first, but growing steadier as she spoke. "I thought I was here to save Rusty, but the truth is, we saved each other. Every one of us here has felt abandoned or broken at some point. We all carry scars, some on the outside, some where nobody can see. I learned, through Rusty, that healing isn't about fixing what's broken and pretending it never happened. It's about staying, about presence and patience. It's about trusting again, even when you have every reason to run." The crowd was quiet. Olivia gave her a thumbs up, and Marlene wiped away tears. Rachel felt something settle inside her, a peace that she'd never known before. She continued, "True loyalty isn't easy. It's not some magical feeling that just appears. It's a choice you make every day." When Rusty was terrified in that storm, when the fire threatened to take everything, we didn't walk away. We stayed, even when it was hard, even when we were scared. That's what heals you. Not grand gestures, but the decision to keep showing up, no matter what. After the event, people approached her with their own stories. A woman whose dog helped her through grief, a young man who fostered troubled teens, a retired teacher who still read to kids at the library. The sanctuary had become a beacon, not just for lost animals, but for anyone who needed hope that something broken could be made whole. That evening, Rachel returned to the pasture, the light turning everything golden. She found Rusty at the far end of the fence, resting his head atop the rail, the foal curled beside his feet. Lady and Bruno grazed quietly nearby, the scars on their bodies now just part of their story, not the whole of it. Rachel leaned against the fence and closed her eyes, listening to the steady sound of hooves in the grass, the distant laughter of children who'd come to help with chores. Rusty ambled over, nudged her shoulder with his velvet nose, then rested his head gently on her arm. She let the silence linger, her heart full. "We made it," she whispered, though she knew their journey wasn't over. "Thank you, Rusty, for not giving up, for teaching me how to trust again." In the quiet, with the herd around her and the sanctuary safe for another day, Rachel realized something deeper. Healing is never a straight line, never quick or easy. It's a mosaic of tiny moments, choosing to try again after failure, to reach out even when you feel unworthy, to believe in redemption for others and for yourself. Rusty had become more than just a rescued horse. He was a living testament to the power of not giving up. Rachel's story, once filled with disappointment and retreat, was now woven into something much bigger, a circle of loyalty, courage, and hope that reached far beyond her own small world. As twilight gathered and fireflies began to dance over the fields, Rachel and Rusty stood together, both changed. She knew that the scars would never fully disappear, but she also knew they didn't have to. They were proof of survival, of the possibility that, given enough patience and love, even the most wounded could find their way back to wholeness. And as Rusty stood, steady and unafraid beside her, Rachel understood at last. Sometimes, you rescue a lost soul only to find you've rescued yourself. The pasture was quiet, but Rachel's heart was loud with gratitude, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. 1 year later, the sanctuary pulsed with life and hope, its fields green and gold beneath a broad Kentucky sky. It was the anniversary of Rusty's rescue, and Rachel had planned an open day for families, volunteers, and supporters, a celebration of everything the sanctuary and everyone who'd touched it had survived and built together. The morning was filled with laughter, children's shouts, and the steady thump of hooves. Tables loaded with cookies, lemonade, and home-baked pies circled the new barn, its walls painted with cheerful murals by local artists and kids alike. There were banners strung between fence posts, bright balloons, and a handmade sign, "Welcome to New Hope Sanctuary, a place for healing." Rachel stood by the pasture gate, watching the visitors arrive in clusters, families from town, volunteers from as far away as Cincinnati, neighbors who'd once complained now laughing and carrying plates of food. Kids took turns grooming the horses, learning how to hold a brush just so, their faces lighting up at every nicker or swish of a tail. Rusty, regal, and calm, let even the shyest children stroke his muzzle. The foal pranced after him. Lady and Bruno stood sentinel, and the whole herd had grown to include several rescues: a sturdy mule, a pony with a crooked ear, and a rescued mini donkey named Tessie, who now ruled the barnyard with gentle authority. As the midday sun shone down, Rachel gathered everyone by the barn to unveil a new mural, a gift from the volunteers and local kids. The painting showed Rusty running free across a wildflower meadow, his mane flying, children and animals around him. And at the horizon, a rainbow arching over rolling fields. The crowd clapped, kids cheered. And for a moment Rachel felt tears sting her eyes. Not of sadness, but of something more lasting and sweet. She turned and hugged Olivia, who squeezed her back tightly. "You did it, Rach," Olivia whispered, pride and love in her voice. "You gave him a place to run." After cake was served, and the crowd had drifted to the pastures, Rachel walked along the fence with Rusty at her side, the sun warm on their backs. She stopped where the wildflowers bloomed thickest and leaned against the rail. Rusty nuzzled her shoulder, his breath steady and gentle. All around, she saw what she and her friends, and Rusty, had built from hardship and heartbreak. Children learning kindness, neighbors who had become friends, broken animals who'd found peace. She saw a circle of hope that was ever widening, one ripple reaching the next. Later that afternoon, as the party wound down, Rachel gathered everyone beneath the shade of the old oak tree. She stood beside Rusty, feeling the weight and wonder of all they'd been through. The laughter faded into a hush as she began to speak. "A year ago," she said, "I was standing by a broken fence, desperate and scared, thinking I'd lost everything. I found Rusty abandoned and terrified, and I thought maybe I could save him. But what I didn't know was that he would end up saving me. He taught me that the strongest love is built not on perfection, but on sacrifice and second chances, on the willingness to start again, even when you're afraid you can't." Rusty's scars didn't make him unlovable. They made him real, and they made him brave. She looked out at the faces before her, children with smudged cheeks, parents, volunteers, neighbors, and the many who'd shown up when things were darkest. If you see someone lost or hurting, animal or person, reach out. Offer your hand, your time, your understanding. You never know what kind of healing you can spark, for them and for yourself. Don't turn away from the broken. Don't believe the voices that say they're too far gone. There's always hope, as long as we choose not to give up. The crowd was silent, the words hanging in the summer air. Rusty stepped forward, resting his head against Rachel's arm, his eyes soft and steady. She stroked his cheek, feeling the warmth of his trust, the power of the journey they'd shared. Olivia started the applause, and soon everyone joined in, laughter and cheers mingling as the celebration resumed. As twilight fell, the sanctuary glowed with lantern light. Families lingered by the fence, reluctant to leave, and children tossed handfuls of wildflowers into the grass. Rachel watched Rusty graze at the pasture's edge, Lady and Bruno nearby, the foal chasing fireflies. Tessie the donkey brayed once, her voice cutting through the dusk, and laughter echoed across the field. Rachel wandered to the mural and gazed at the painted Rusty, forever running free, forever a symbol of what could be mended. She felt a sense of wholeness she'd never known before, a certainty that the hardest battles had given her the strongest purpose. All the heartbreak, the fear, the moments she nearly quit, they had led her to this, a circle that kept growing, a sanctuary not just for horses, but for people, for community, for hope itself. At the end of the night, Rachel stood at the gate as the last families departed, thanking each person by name. She turned to Rusty, who waited for her in the soft, golden light. They walked side by side to the pasture fence, where Rachel leaned, arm draped over his neck. The land was peaceful, the stars just blinking awake. She spoke softly, her words carried by the night breeze. "We're home, Rusty. We made it." He pressed close, as if understanding every word. The story they'd started together was only one of many. The sanctuary was now a haven where new stories of healing began every day. Rachel knew the future would hold more trials, more moments of doubt, more battles to fight. But she no longer feared them. Rusty's journey had taught her that the broken could become whole, that love and loyalty could spark change far beyond what she could imagine. She looked out over the darkening fields, the laughter and music fading into memory, the promise of tomorrow shining bright, and as she and Rusty stood together at the pasture gate, she felt hope rise, gentle, enduring, and unbreakable. One story had ended, but countless stories of hope and second chances were just beginning. Right here in the heart of New Hope Sanctuary.